I used to think the worst thing about hearing your own voice played back was the embarrassment of it. The way it never matches the version you carry in your head. Too thin. Too sharp. Too honest. Now I know it can be worse than that. Now I know your own voice can come from places you didn't put it. I didn't come back to Briar Hollow because I missed it. I came back because there was nothing left to do from a distance. My mother's lawyer called twice in one day, that careful, practiced voice people use when they're trying to be respectful and efficient at the same time. There were papers to sign. Locks to change. A house that wasn't being lived in anymore. He said, "It's better if you're there in person." And I pretended I needed to think about it. But the truth is I'd been thinking about it for years. About that house sitting at the end of Juniper Lane like a mouth closed around something it never swallowed properly. About how places don't forget. About how they keep the shape of you, even when you're gone. I arrived on a Friday afternoon in late October, the sky the color of a dirty bandage. The town looked smaller than it did when I left, which is what everyone says, and it's always partly true, not because the buildings shrink, but because you finally understand how little there ever was. The grocery store sign still buzzed like an insect. The diner still had those red vinyl stools that crack in winter. The old church still leaned subtly to one side like it was listening for something. And my mother's house, my house, for now, was still there, the same pale siding, the same narrow porch, the same front window where she used to stand when she thought I wasn't watching. I parked in the driveway and sat with my hands on the wheel until the ticking of the cooling engine got too loud to ignore. There are certain silences that aren't peaceful. They don't feel like rest. They feel like a held breath. Like the moment right before someone tells you news you already know, but you've been forcing yourself to believe you don't. When I finally went up the porch steps, I noticed the swing had been taken down. Not broken, just removed. The hooks were still in the ceiling, two dark crescents. It made the porch look unfinished, like a sentence that stops in the middle. The key the lawyer gave me turned with a reluctant scrape, like it didn't recognize me anymore. Inside, the air was stale and cool, with the faint metallic smell of old plumbing. It wasn't the smell of abandonment, exactly. It was the smell of things left in place too neatly, as if my mother had gone out for milk and decided, mid-step, to never come back. The living room was still arranged around absence. The lamp by the couch. The Afghan folded on the armrest. A coaster on the coffee table with a ring dried into it, like a fossil of a habit. And on the kitchen wall, just inside the doorway, was the intercom. I'd forgotten about it. Or maybe I'd trained myself not to look at it the way you can train yourself not to look at a crack in the ceiling you're afraid will widen if you stare too long. It was an old beige plastic panel with a speaker grill, a row of square buttons beneath, and a little red indicator light in the corner. Each button had a label in my mother's careful handwriting. Kitchen, living, bed 1, bed 2, basement. The last one had always bothered me, even as a kid. There was no basement. Not really. There was a crawlspace access door in the pantry floor, and a shallow, dirt-floored void under the house that smelled like damp wood and old spiders. But no basement you could stand up in. No place you'd call a basement unless you wanted to pretend there was more room down there than there was. My mother must have labeled it out of habit, or hope, or because the intercom came from some other house and she never bothered to remove the button. Or because she liked the idea of a room that didn't exist but still had a name. I set my suitcase down by the kitchen table and ran my fingers over the panel. The plastic was slightly tacky, like old toys. Dust had settled in the seams. I pressed living. For a moment there was nothing. Then, faintly, a click, and a wash of static that sounded like distant rain. I let go, and it died. I pressed bed 1. Click. Static. Nothing else. I told myself, of course it doesn't work. The wiring was probably frayed, the speakers dead, the whole thing a relic my mother never got around to removing. Still, I stood there longer than I needed to, with my thumb hovering over the last button. Basement. The red light in the corner was off. It had always been off when we weren't using it, and I remembered, with a strange, unwelcome clarity, What that light looked like at night when it was on, how it stained the kitchen wall with a dim, surgical glow. I didn't press it. Instead, I went about the small, practical rituals of arriving somewhere you don't want to be. I opened windows to let the air change. I found the breaker box and flipped a few switches. I ran water in the sink until it stopped coughing rust-colored spit. I unpacked only what I needed. Toothbrush, phone charger, a hoodie. And when the sun finally dropped behind the trees and the kitchen turned the color of old tea, I made myself a cup of instant soup and ate it standing up, because sitting at the table felt too much like rehearsing a life I no longer had. That first night, I slept on top of the made bed in my mother's room, still fully dressed, the way you do when you're not sure you're staying. The house creaked around me as it cooled. The refrigerator made its hollow, settling groan. Somewhere in the walls, something tapped once, twice, and then stopped, as if it had only needed to make sure I was listening. I woke at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of a click. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a clean, mechanical sound that didn't belong to the wood and plaster language of the house. I lay there with my eyes open, waiting for whatever came next. A thin hiss filled the room. A familiar static, like breath through teeth. And then, from somewhere, near and far at the same time, my mother's voice said, very softly, "Turn it off." I sat up so fast my stomach lurched. The room was dark, but not fully. Moonlight leaked through the blinds in pale strips. The closet door was half open, though I could have sworn I'd closed it. The hiss continued. A soft underlay, patient. I listened again, holding my breath, trying to decide if I dreamed it. Grief does that sometimes. It gives you a voice you're starving to hear. It feeds you scraps in the middle of the night. "Mom?" I said before I could stop myself. The hiss stopped immediately, like someone lifting a finger off a button. Silence rushed in, thick and embarrassed. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dark outline of the dresser, the mirror reflecting nothing but shadow. I told myself it was a dream. A memory. My brain, misfiring in a familiar room. But when I finally got up to use the bathroom, I noticed something I hadn't seen in daylight. A small red glow, faint as a coal, bleeding under the kitchen doorway. The intercom light. It was on. I stood in the hallway, barefoot on cold wood, staring at that glow like it was an eye half open in the dark. The hiss wasn't loud enough to travel that far, but I could feel it anyway, in my teeth. I walked toward it slowly, as if the floor might change its mind under me. In the kitchen, the panel's red light was steady. No buttons seemed pressed in. The house didn't look different, but it felt attended to. Like someone had just been there. I leaned in close to the speaker grill. The plastic smelled faintly warm. Hello? I said, and hated the way my voice sounded in the dark. Too small. Static whispered back. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, something said, "You're home." Not my mother this time. Mine. It wasn't a perfect match, like a recording played through cheap speakers, flattened and thinned. But it had my cadence. My habit of letting the ends of words drop, like I didn't want to commit to them. My skin prickled. I pulled my hand back like the panel was hot. I stared at the buttons again, as if I could accuse one of them of being responsible. The red light stayed on. "Who is this?" I asked absurdly, because what else do you ask a wall? Static. A soft pop. Then my voice again, a little clearer. "Don't." A burst of crackle swallowed the rest. And then the red light went out. I stood there for a full minute with my heart knocking against my ribs, waiting for it to come back on. It didn't. The next morning, in the bright honesty of daylight, it all felt easier to file away into the cabinet of explainable things. Old wiring. Crossed lines. Radio interference. A neighbor's baby monitor bleeding into the system. Briar Hollow was the kind of town where weirdness could survive simply because no one had the energy to investigate it. People were tired. People were busy. People had learned to live around whatever was wrong. Still, I unplugged the intercom from the wall. There was a cord running down the side, tucked behind a cabinet, plugged into an outlet I'd never noticed. When I pulled it free, I half expected the whole panel to go dead in a satisfying, final way. Nothing changed, of course. It was already off. But that night, at 2:17 a.m., I woke to the same click. The same hiss. Only this time, the red light didn't glow under the kitchen door. It glowed under my bedroom door. For a moment I couldn't understand what I was seeing. A thin red line like a warning. Like a boundary. I got up and opened the door. The hallway was dark, empty. But the red light was coming from somewhere inside my mother's room. I hadn't been sleeping there this time. I'd moved to my old bedroom down the hall because it felt less haunted by her. Less saturated. But the intercom, apparently, hadn't cared. I walked to her doorway and looked in. On her nightstand, where her lamp used to be, sat a small speaker box I didn't recognize. Beige plastic, rounded corners. A grill on the front. The intercom system had a room unit. I stood there, stunned by how my own memory had edited it out. The house had always had these. One in each bedroom. We used to press the button and whisper stupid things to each other. My mother calling me for dinner, me calling back that I was dying of homework. Her laughing, telling me not to be dramatic. But there was another use, too. A use we didn't talk about. When I was 10, my mother had gotten sick for a while. Not dying sick, not yet, but sick enough that she'd gotten frightened of being alone in the house. The intercom became her tether. She could call from bed, and I'd come running. She could make sure she hadn't slipped into silence without anyone noticing. She'd made me promise I would always answer. I stood in the doorway looking at that little speaker box, and the hiss seemed to swell, as if it knew I was paying attention now. Then my voice said very calmly, "Don't answer like that." I froze. "What do you mean?" I whispered. Static. A faint click. Then, "You'll make it worse." My mouth went dry. I stared at the little speaker as if it might sprout a face. "This isn't funny," I said, and even to me it sounded unconvincing, like a line from a movie I'd never really believed in. The voice didn't laugh. It didn't react. It just waited, a patient animal. And then, softer, almost tender, "I heard you say Mom last night." My stomach tightened. There are things that are frightening because they threaten you. And then there are things that are frightening because they know you. I backed away from the doorway, my heel catching on the carpet edge, and nearly stumbled. The speaker's hiss followed me in my head, lingering even after I shut the door. I didn't sleep much after that. I lay in bed and listened to the house settle, and every small sound felt like a decision being made in another room. The next day, I drove into town under a sky that couldn't commit to rain. I told myself I needed groceries, but really I needed people, faces, voices, proof that the world was still arranged in normal ways. At the diner, the woman behind the counter recognized me after a minute too long. Her smile slipped into place with effort. "Cal Hartley," she said. "Well, look at you." I hadn't been called Cal by anyone in Briar Hollow in a decade. Hearing it made something in my chest twist. "Hi, Marianne," I said, and sat at the counter like I belonged. She poured coffee without asking. The kind of kindness that comes from routines, not intimacy. "How's your mom?" she asked, and then her face changed as the question finished leaving her mouth. "Oh," she said softer. "Honey, I'm sorry." I nodded because that's what you do when someone offers condolences you don't know how to hold. "Back to take care of things?" she tried. "Yeah. Just for a bit." She leaned closer, lowering her voice as if grief was contagious. "That house been sitting quiet for a while." "Mostly," I said. Marianne's eyes flicked, almost unconsciously, to the corner of the diner where an old rotary phone hung on the wall like a museum piece. Then she looked back at me. "You remember how folks used to say your mama's place had quirks?" she asked. I tried to laugh. "Everyone's house has quirks." She said, not agreeing. "Well, if it starts acting up, you don't need to be alone with it. You can come here. Acting up, I repeated, and kept my voice light, but my fingers tightened around the mug. Marianne busied herself wiping down a clean section of counter. Juniper Lane's always been funny. Lines get crossed. Lights do things. People hear what they want to hear. What they want, I said. She didn't meet my eyes. Or what they don't. I should have let it go. I should have taken my groceries and driven back and pretended the intercom was nothing but an old piece of plastic. But something in me, the same something that used to pick at scabs just to see if they'd bleed, couldn't leave it alone. Did my mom ever mention it? I asked carefully. Before she. Marianne's hand paused mid-wipe. She mentioned a lot of things toward the end. My throat tightened. Like what? Marianne finally looked at me, and there was a seriousness there that made her seem older than I remembered. She asked if you'd come back, she said. She asked if you'd remember. Remember what? I asked, though I already felt the answer moving under my ribs like an animal waking up. Marianne's mouth pressed into a thin line. She glanced down the counter, as if checking who could hear. There were only 2 other customers, both old men who looked welded to their seats. Cal, she said, and my name sounded like a warning. Some things don't get better when you touch them again. I forced a smile I couldn't feel. I'm just sorting through stuff. Marianne nodded slowly. Then, as if against her own better judgment, she added, If you hear it, don't talk back. My skin went cold. Hear what? Marianne's face tightened, like she regretted the words already. You know, she said, and reached for the coffee pot as if the conversation could be poured over and drowned. Old houses. They pop. They hiss. They make you think someone's calling you. I could have pushed. I could have asked why everyone in this town seemed to share a script about my mother's house. But the way Marianne's hands trembled slightly as she poured told me that whatever she knew, she didn't want to hand it to me. So I paid for my coffee and left. On the drive back, the trees along the road stood bare and thin, like a crowd that had stopped clapping. I kept seeing the intercom buttons in my head, that neat handwriting, the one word that didn't belong, basement. When I got home, the house looked exactly the same as it had when I left, quiet, still, patiently pretending it wasn't listening. I tried to keep busy. I opened closets. I sorted boxes. I found my mother's old sweater still hanging in the hall closet. The smell of her detergent caught in the fabric like a trapped memory. I sat on the floor and held one to my face longer than I should have. In the afternoon, I went into the pantry to look for cleaning supplies and noticed the crawlspace door. A square of wood set into the floor, with a small metal ring to pull it up. I remembered the way it used to stick, the way my mother would scold me for leaving it unlatched. The pantry smelled like dry cereal and old onions. I crouched and hooked my finger through the ring. And then I stopped. Because the metal ring was warm. Not sun-warm. Not. The house is heated. Warm. Warm like it had been held. I stared at it for a long moment, my mind offering explanations the way it offers prayers when it doesn't believe in God. The furnace ran. Warm air rose. Heat collects. But the rest of the pantry floor was cold beneath my knees. I stood up slowly, as if I might disturb something by moving too fast. That night I left every light on. I told myself it was practical, old house, unfamiliar corners, safer to see. But really, I didn't want the dark to have places to gather. At 2:17 a.m., the click came anyway. The hiss seeped into my room like fog. And then my voice, clearer than it had been before, said, "You're doing it again." I sat up, heart pounding. "Stop," I whispered. "Just stop." Static crackled, amused without laughter. "You always think lights help," my voice said. "They don't." My mouth went dry. "Who are you?" There was a pause long enough for me to imagine someone on the other end, choosing words. Then softly, "You know." And I did. Not in a rational way. Not in a, "I have evidence" way. In the way your body knows a door is unlocked before your mind has checked it. In the way your tongue knows a tooth is loose before you've touched it. I slid out of bed and walked into the hallway, drawn despite myself toward the kitchen. The intercom panel was still unplugged. I'd left the cord hanging like a severed tail. But the red light was on. A steady glow, unwavering. My throat tightened. I stepped closer, and the hiss grew louder, filling the kitchen with that dry, breathy sound. "Where is this coming from?" I demanded, because anger felt safer than fear. "Static." Then my voice again, almost gentle. "From where you left it." I stared at the basement button. And before I could stop myself, before I could talk myself out of it, I pressed it. The button sank in with a soft, sticky click. The red light brightened, as if satisfied. For a moment, the speaker was silent. Then something changed in the static. It wasn't just noise anymore. It had depth. Distance. Like a room tone. And beneath it, faint and unmistakable, was the sound of someone breathing. Not panting. Not dramatic. Just steady, careful breaths, like someone trying not to be heard. My skin crawled. "Hello?" I whispered into the panel, my mouth close enough to smell dust. The breathing paused. Then, from somewhere deep in that line, distant, muffled, as if filtered through soil, came a sound I hadn't heard in years. A child's voice, thin as paper. "Cal?" My knees went weak so fast I had to grab the counter. The name wasn't shouted. It wasn't angry. It was relieved. As if whoever spoke it had been waiting politely for me to come back. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe properly. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, the walls inching closer, listening. The voice came again, softer now, uncertain. Is that you?" The world tilted. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a door I'd nailed shut began to splinter. I swallowed hard. "Evan?" I managed, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Static hissed, and the breathing returned, faster now, like excitement or fear. "Don't hang up," the boy whispered. "I'm not," I said quickly, absurdly, as if this were a normal phone call. As if my hand on the button wasn't trembling. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice breaking on the last word. The static surged, swallowing the line, and for a second all I heard was noise and the thud of my own heart. Then, faintly, "Down here." I squeezed my eyes shut. Images tried to surface. Flashbulb memories I'd avoided for years. The old flashlight beam. The smell of dirt. A laugh that turned sharp. A door pulled closed too hard. I opened my eyes again, staring at the pantry door across the kitchen. The crawl space. My hand was still pressing the basement button. My finger felt numb, like it wasn't mine. "I don't have much time," my voice said suddenly, cutting through the static. I jerked as if slapped. "What?" My voice, older, steadier, said, "They'll stop talking if you ask too many questions." I stared at the panel. What is this?" The response came softly, almost like a sigh. "This is what you came back for." And then the line filled with a new sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like knuckles against wood, slow and patient. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. I remembered that pattern so clearly it made my stomach heave. We used to do it as kids, tapping on desks in class, a code for "I'm here." "Are you there?" My hand flew off the button. The red light stayed on for 2 full seconds. Then it clicked off, like an eye closing. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, and watched dawn leak in through the window as if it was ashamed of what it was revealing. When morning came, I did what I should have done immediately. I called the police. I told myself I would. I even held my phone in my hand and scrolled to the number, my thumb hovering. But what would I say? "Hello," I pressed a button on an unplugged intercom and heard the voice of a boy who disappeared 20 years ago. "Hello, my childhood home is making phone calls from a room that doesn't exist." There are truths that sound like lies the moment you speak them aloud. And there are lies you've lived with so long they start to sound like truth. So instead, I went to the pantry and pulled up the crawl space door. It stuck, as I remembered. I had to tug twice before it gave with a dusty groan. A rectangle of darkness opened beneath my feet, breathing up cold air that smelled of wet wood and old earth. I knelt and aimed my phone flashlight down. The crawl space wasn't deep. Maybe 3 feet from the joists to the dirt. Enough space to belly crawl, not enough to kneel. The ground was uneven, scattered with old scraps of insulation and the occasional pale gleam of a spiderweb. Nothing moved. Nothing waited with open arms. Still, my throat tightened as if the dark itself had fingers. I didn't go in right away. I stayed there on my knees for a long time, staring at the dirt like it might rearrange itself into an answer. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a thin line of newer wood along the far edge, where the crawl space opened toward the center of the house. A board that didn't match the others. It looked, added, like a patch. I crawled down onto my stomach, the pantry floor pressing cold against my ribs, and stretched my arm into the space. Dust coated my hand immediately. My flashlight beam wobbled. I reached toward the board, and my fingers brushed something smooth and plastic. A small object wedged between the joist and the dirt. I pulled it free. A cassette recorder. One of those cheap handheld ones with a built-in microphone and a single red, rec button. The kind you used to buy at drugstores. The plastic was scuffed, the battery compartment taped shut. A strip of masking tape was stuck to the back with handwriting on it. My handwriting. 3 words, in blocky, uneven letters I hadn't used since I was a teenager, for when you're ready. My stomach dropped so hard I tasted metal. I sat up, bumping my head on the pantry shelf, and climbed out of the crawl space like I was escaping something. I shut the door and latched it, my hands shaking. The recorder sat heavy in my palm, too real to be a dream. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't want to press play. Because pressing play meant admitting I had once made a recording for my future self. It meant admitting I had known, even then, that I was going to try to forget. That I would need help remembering the thing I'd buried. Eventually, my thumb found the button anyway. The taped word, a soft mechanical purr. At first there was only room noise, muffled, distant, like the recorder had been inside a pocket. Then a breath. A shift. And then my voice. Not the voice I have now. Younger. Thinner. But undeniably mine. I don't know if this is stupid, teenage me said, speaking quickly, like he was afraid of silence. I don't know if you'll even listen. But if you're listening, it means you came back. So, you deserve to hear it. I swallowed hard, my throat aching. On the tape, a door creaked. Someone, me, sniffed, like he'd been crying. I did it, the boy said. I didn't mean to, at first I didn't. I just wanted him to shut up. He wouldn't stop talking and he was laughing at me and I. A harsh breath. It was the pantry, he said. It was the stupid door. And he went under there because he said he wasn't scared, and I said he was lying, and he said I was the one who was scared, and I... My stomach clenched so tightly I thought I might be sick. On the tape, my younger self's voice cracked. I closed it, he whispered. The room around me blurred. I gripped the recorder harder, as if it might float away. I closed it and I sat on it, the boy said, voice shaking. I sat on it because I thought he'd start yelling and Mom would hear and then it would be my fault and, God, I'm sorry. A sound rose up behind his words. Faint at first, then clearer. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. On the tape, my younger self went silent. You can hear him breathing. You can hear how he's listening. Then, very far away, muffled as if through wood and earth, a child's voice says, Cal? The same voice I'd heard through the intercom. Evan. On the tape, my younger self whispers, Shut up, but it isn't anger anymore. It's panic. It's begging. It's a prayer to a situation that has stopped listening. I'll let you out, the boy says quickly. I will. Just be quiet for a minute. I just need a minute. The tapping continues. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. Then, another sound. A heavier knock. Like something shifting. Like pressure against wood. My younger self inhales sharply. I can't, he whispers. I can't do it right now. I can't. If I open it, she'll see. If she sees, she'll. His breath turns ragged. I'll come back, he says. I swear. I'll come back later when she's asleep. Just wait. Please. And then the tape ends. Not with a click. Not with a neat stop. It ends with a sudden violent burst of static, as if someone had grabbed the recorder, as if the microphone had been shoved into fabric, as if the world had been muffled on purpose. I sat very still in my mother's kitchen, the tape's empty hiss filling the air like a second atmosphere. My hands were numb. I had forgotten so much. Or I had told myself I'd forgotten. But the body remembers what the mind refuses. I remembered sitting on that pantry door. I remembered the weight of it under me. I remembered the way Evan's voice had sounded at first, playful, teasing, and then, later, how it had changed. I remembered my mother calling my name from the living room, asking what I was doing. And I remembered saying, too quickly, nothing. Like nothing could cover it. Like nothing could keep it down there. I didn't remember what happened next. That was the missing piece I'd built my entire adult life around, the blank stretch of time where my guilt had learned to become quiet. I looked at the intercom panel on the wall. Unplugged. Silent. And yet, as I stared, the red light flickered once. Just once. Like a heartbeat. That night, I didn't turn the lights on. I sat in the dark kitchen with the cassette recorder in front of me like an offering. I waited. Not for a ghost. Not for a monster. For myself. At 2:17 a.m., the click came right on time. The red light bloomed on the panel. The hiss flowed out, familiar now in the worst way, like the sound of a room you've been locked in before. I didn't move. I didn't speak. For a long moment, there was only static. Then my voice, close and clear, said, "You listened." I closed my eyes. "Yes," I whispered. "Good," my voice said, and there was something like relief in it. "Now don't lie this time." My heart thudded painfully. "I don't remember," I said, and the words tasted like shame. "I don't remember what I did after." Static crackled, as if the line didn't like that answer. Then, faintly, so faintly I wasn't sure it was real, the child's breathing returned. A small hitching inhale. A suppressed sob. "Evan," I said, the name falling out of me. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. My voice, older me, spoke again, softer now. "You remember more than you think," it said. "You just don't want to." I was a kid, I whispered, and immediately hated myself for how quickly I reached for that excuse. You were old enough," my voice said, and there was no anger in it. Only certainty. "You were old enough to know what you were doing." My mouth trembled. I pressed my palms hard against my eyes until I saw sparks. "What do you want?" I asked. The static shifted. The line deepened, like something leaning closer. Then my voice said, "Go to the pantry." My stomach clenched. I didn't move. The red light stayed on, patient. "Go," my voice repeated. "And don't turn the light on." I stood slowly, my legs stiff. The kitchen floor felt colder than it should have. I walked to the pantry door and opened it. Darkness spilled out, thick as cloth. I knelt, my hands finding the crawlspace ring by touch. The metal was warm again. Behind me, the intercom hissed, a constant presence. I pulled. The door lifted with a reluctant groan, and cold air breathed up into my face, smelling of earth and something faintly sweet, like old cardboard. I aimed no light into it. I just stared into the dark, letting my eyes strain and fail. "Hello?" I whispered, and the word felt wrong, polite in a place that didn't deserve politeness. For a moment, nothing. Then, so softly it might have been my own breath, came a whisper from below. Cal. I flinched hard enough my shoulder hit the pantry shelf. The voice sounded closer than it had over the intercom. Less filtered. More present. My throat tightened so hard I could barely swallow. Evan. I breathed. I'm sorry. Silence. Then, a faint movement below, like a hand dragging through dirt. And the tapping, now not on the intercom line, but in the wood beneath my knees. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. My vision swam. I pressed my forehead to the pantry floor. I came back. I whispered. I didn't know how to. The voice below interrupted me, quiet and exhausted. Did you come back then? The question landed in me like a stone. I couldn't answer. Because in that moment, the missing memory didn't return as an image. It returned as a feeling, an old, familiar cowardice rising like bile. I remembered standing up from the pantry door. I remembered hearing Evan's breathing change. I remembered my mother's footsteps in the hallway. And I remembered, horribly, clearly, the choice I made. I hadn't gone back later. Not that night. Not the next. Not ever. I had waited. I had listened. And when the tapping stopped, I told myself it meant he'd fallen asleep. I told myself, later, when days passed and the town began searching, that maybe he'd gotten out on his own. That maybe he'd crawled into the yard and wandered off. That maybe he'd been taken by someone else. But the truth had always been simpler than my imagination. The truth had always been underneath my feet. I leaned over the open crawl space and whispered. No. The words sounded small. Not enough to hold the weight of what it meant. Below, there was a long, long silence. Then the voice said, not angry, not crying, just flat like a fact. I waited. My eyes burned. I didn't wipe them. I didn't deserve comfort. I know, I whispered. You promise, the voice said. I know. A faint sound, like a laugh trying to be born and dying instead, came from below. Then, from the kitchen behind me, my older voice said through the intercom, Now you tell the rest. I froze. Because I suddenly understood something I hadn't wanted to. The voice on the intercom wasn't helping me remember. It was directing me. Guiding me through a path that had already been walked. I swallowed. The rest of what? Static hissed, indulgent. The part you don't like, my voice said. The part you're pretending doesn't matter. Below me, the air in the crawl space felt colder. Thicker. And then, softly, Evan's voice asked, Did she know? My stomach turned. My mother. Did she know? I thought of her labeling the intercom button basement in neat handwriting, like naming something made it manageable. I thought of the way she'd asked Marianne if I would remember. I thought of her standing at the front window for years, waiting for a son who never came home and a boy who never came back. My mouth trembled. I think, I began, and couldn't finish. Because memory, when it finally opens, doesn't open like a door. It opens like a wound. I remembered my mother, days after Evan disappeared, scrubbing the pantry floor on her hands and knees until her knuckles bled, not from grief, but from a kind of furious, desperate denial. I remembered her telling me, Don't you ever go down there, and the way she said it like she was speaking to herself. I remembered waking one night as a kid to hear her in the kitchen, pressing intercom buttons with shaking fingers, whispering, Please! Please! Maybe she heard it too. The tapping. The breathing. The boy calling my name. Maybe she answered. Maybe she made her own promises. I stared into the crawlspace darkness until my eyes ached. I think she did, I whispered. There was a slow exhale from below. A sound like relief, twisted. Then Evan's voice said very quietly, She told me not to make noise. My blood went cold. Behind me, the intercom hiss rose, louder than it had been, like a rush of breath. My voice, older me, said, almost gently, See? I couldn't move. My knees felt locked. She told me. Evan repeated, as if remembering it in pieces. She said, if I was quiet, you would come back. My throat tightened until I couldn't breathe properly. No, I whispered. No, she wouldn't. The intercom clicked sharply, like impatience. My voice said firmer. She didn't want to lose you too. I closed my eyes. Images came unbidden, my mother's face, exhausted, hollowed by fear. A woman who had already begun to understand that her life was made of losses she couldn't stop. She didn't know what else to do. My voice continued, and it sounded almost sympathetic. So she did what you did. She waited. She listened. She told herself it would be okay if nobody spoke about it. My stomach heaved. I swallowed it down. I didn't mean, I started. But the intercom hissed over me, drowning the words like it had done on the tape. And below, Evan's voice said, not accusing now, just stating the shape of the truth. You left me here. 3 taps rose from the wood again. A pause. 3 taps. Then, slowly, the crawl space air shifted. Not like something crawling closer. Like something standing up. The darkness seemed to rise, filling the opening. I opened my eyes and stared down, my breath caught. I couldn't see a face. Couldn't see hands. But I felt, with absolute certainty, that something was directly beneath me now, looking up. And in that moment, I realized what the intercom had been doing all along. It wasn't a phone. It was a loop. A circuit. A way for this house to keep talking to itself, to keep replaying the moment where everything went wrong, again and again, until someone finally said the right words. Until someone finally took the right action. My older voice, through the intercom, said, "Now it's your turn to promise." My mouth went dry. What does that mean? Static crackled like amusement. It means you don't get to leave it unfinished. My voice said. Not this time. The darkness below seemed to press closer to the opening, filling my senses with cold. And Evan's voice, so close now it felt like it was inside my own mouth, whispered, "Come down." I jerked back, slamming the crawlspace door halfway closed by accident. The wood thudded, shaking dust loose. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. "No," I gasped. "No. I'm not." The intercom clicked sharp. My voice said low and firm. "You already did." I froze. Because I understood the worst possibility then, the one my mind had been circling since the first night without daring to land. The voice on the intercom wasn't coming from some ghostly elsewhere. It was coming from me. From a version of me in this house, at some other point in the loop. A me who had already been down there, already been asked, already been swallowed by whatever consequence this place demanded. A me who was now part of the wiring. Part of the hiss. Part of the voice that wakes up at 2:17 a.m. and calls your name. My hands shook violently. I looked at the open pantry door, at the rectangle of darkness still yawning beneath the half-closed crawlspace lid. "You're not real," I whispered, to the intercom, to the house, to myself. Static. Then my voice said very softly, "I'm what you became when you didn't tell anyone." I backed away, stumbling out of the pantry. The kitchen felt suddenly huge and empty, like a stage after the actors have left. The intercom red light burned steadily on the wall. "You can stop it," my voice said. "You can end it." "How?" I choked. There was a pause long enough to feel like the house was smiling. Then, "Go down," my voice said. "And stay." My stomach turned. Tears burned behind my eyes. "No," I whispered again, and it sounded like a child. Static hissed louder. "You promise," Evan's voice said from below, not angry, just tired. And then, from the intercom, my mother's voice returned, so faint it could have been imagined. "Turn it off." I stood in the middle of the kitchen, shaking, surrounded by voices that belonged to people who weren't supposed to be here. My mother, who was gone. Evan, who had been missing for 20 years. Me, who was standing right there and yet apparently also speaking from inside the walls. I didn't know which of them was real. Maybe none of them were. Maybe this was what guilt sounds like when it finally gets tired of being carried quietly. I don't remember deciding to do what I did next. I only remember my hand reaching for the cassette recorder on the table. My thumb pressing the red button. The little machine clicked, obedient. And I began to speak. I told the truth out loud for the first time in my life, in that kitchen, with the intercom hissing like breathe beside me. I said Evan's name. I said what I did. I said that I waited. I said that my mother knew. I said that I left. As I spoke, the intercom static softened, as if listening. The red light stayed on, steady, like a witness. When I finished, I sat very still, the recorder still running, capturing my breathing, my quiet sobs, the long silence after confession. Then the intercom clicked. My older voice, calmer now, almost relieved, said, "Good." I stared at the wall. "Is that enough?" I whispered. Static. Then, quietly, "Not yet." The red light flickered once. And the tapping began again, 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps, now coming from the pantry floor, steady and patient, like someone knocking from the inside of a door. I don't know how long I sat there listening to it. Hours, maybe. At some point the sky outside the kitchen window lightened, turning the glass into a pale mirror. I saw my own reflection, hollow-eyed, hair unwashed, mouth trembling. Behind my reflection, for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw someone standing in the hallway. A man in a hoodie. My hoodie. He didn't move. He just watched me with the stillness of a photograph. When I turned, the hallway was empty. But the intercom hiss rose, as if pleased. I left the house that morning. I packed my suitcase with shaking hands and walked out without looking back. I drove until the town thinned into trees, until the radio found stations from somewhere else, until my hands stopped trembling on the wheel. And then, somewhere on the highway, my phone rang. No caller ID. Just a blank screen and a soft vibration. I didn't answer. It rang until it stopped. A few seconds later, a voicemail notification appeared. One message. I pulled over, my pulse loud in my ears, and listened with my thumb hovering over the speaker icon like it might burn me. Static hissed. A click. And then my voice, thin and flattened, like it was coming through a cheap plastic grill. "You're doing it again." I sat there on the shoulder of the road, staring at the trees, at the gray sky, at the world pretending it was normal. The message continued, my own voice soft, intimate, almost kind. "You can drive as far as you want. But you know what time it is." A pause. Then, very quietly, as if spoken close to an intercom in the dark. "At 2:17, you'll hear me." The voicemail ended. I didn't drive back. I want to be clear about that, because if I don't say it plainly, my mind will try to soften it into something kinder. I didn't turn around. I didn't go to the police. I didn't march into town and drag everyone back to that pantry door with flashlights and righteous outrage. I kept driving. And that's the part one can't forgive myself for, because it means the house was right. It means I haven't changed as much as I like to believe. I'm telling you this now because I don't know what else to do with it anymore. Because the nights have become a countdown I can't escape. Because sometimes, in the quiet moments when my apartment is still and the world feels far away, I swear I can hear a faint click in the walls. And a hiss like breath through teeth. And my own voice, patient as an old habit, calling from a room that doesn't exist. If you ever hear your own voice calling your name from somewhere you know is empty, don't answer. It only learns the shape of you when you do.